Modern Great British History, from Empire to Contemporary Nation. 1. The story of modern Great Britain is a tale of empire, revolution, industry, war, reform, and reinvention. From the heights of imperial domination in the 19th century to the complexities of the 21st century, Britain has been at the center of global change. This narrative unfolds over more than 2 centuries, charting how Britain transformed from a world-spanning empire into a modern, multicultural, democratic state. 2. The Industrial Revolution. 1760s, 1830s. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain in the late 18th century, marking a turning point not only for the nation but for the world. Powered by coal, steam, and mechanization, industries like textiles, iron, and later steel and engineering flourished. Cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and Glasgow became industrial powerhouses. This era saw massive urbanization, the growth of the factory system, and the emergence of a new working class. However, it also brought harsh labor conditions, child labor, and severe environmental degradation. Politically, it spurred debates on reform, leading to movements such as the Luddites and Chartists, who called for workers' rights and voting reform. 3. The British Empire and Victorian Britain. 1837 to 1901. Queen Victoria's reign epitomized the apex of British imperial power. By the late 19th century, Britain ruled over a quarter of the globe, with colonies in India, Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. The motto, "The sun never sets on the British Empire," became a literal truth. At home, the Victorian era was marked by prudence, religious morality, and growing middle-class values. Reforms gradually expanded the franchise, notably the Reform Acts of 1832, 1867, and 1884, improved education and regulated industry. However, the empire's expansion brought brutal colonial wars and exploitation. India, the jewel in the crown, was governed through a mix of direct rule and economic control, culminating in the Indian Rebellion of 1857. Elsewhere, the scramble for Africa saw Britain compete with European rivals in a race for territory, often with little regard for indigenous peoples. 4. World War I and its aftermath. 1914 to 1939. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 pulled Britain into a devastating conflict. Over 900,000 British soldiers died in the Great War, and the economy was severely strained. The war accelerated social change, including the role of women, who filled jobs left by men at the front. Post-war Britain saw a shift toward greater social awareness and reform. The 1918 Representation of the People Act granted voting rights to many women over 30 and all men over 21. The interwar years also witnessed economic struggles, including the General Strike of 1926, the Great Depression, and growing unemployment. Internationally, the empire remained intact but increasingly challenged. Ireland gained independence in 1922, leading to the formation of the Irish Free State, while anti-colonial sentiments grew in India and elsewhere. 5. World War II and the loss of empire. 1939-1950s. Britain again stood against Germany in World War II, enduring the Blitz and years of hardship. Winston Churchill's leadership became symbolic of British resistance. Victory in 1945, however, came at a tremendous cost. Britain was economically drained and heavily indebted. The post-war years brought major transformations. The 1945 Labour government under Clement Attlee introduced sweeping reforms, including the creation of the National Health Service, NHS, nationalization of key industries, and expansion of the welfare state. Britain's imperial decline accelerated. India gained independence in 1947, followed by Pakistan, Ceylon, Sri Lanka, and later dozens of African and Caribbean colonies. The Suez Crisis of 1956 signaled Britain's diminished role on the world stage, as the US and USSR emerged as the new superpowers. 6. Social change in the swinging 60s. 1960s, 1970s. The 1960s were a time of cultural upheaval. Britain led a youth-driven cultural revolution, producing icons like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and fashion trends from London's Carnaby Street. The country became a global hub for pop culture, film, and art. Socially, the period saw the rise of feminism, civil rights, and changing attitudes toward sexuality, religion, and race. Immigration from former colonies increased, transforming Britain into a more multicultural society. This brought both enrichment and racial tensions, especially in urban areas. Economically, however, Britain struggled. The decline of manufacturing, inflation, and labor unrest defined the 1970s. Government struggled with strikes and stagnation. The winter of discontent in 1978 to 79 exemplified a crisis in governance. 7. Thatcherism and neoliberal reform. 1979 to 1990. Margaret Thatcher became Britain's first female prime minister in 1979. She brought a radical shift toward free market policies, privatizing industries, reducing union power, and cutting public spending. Her government broke the miners' strike 1984 to 85 and redefined the British economy around finance and services. Thatcher's policies were deeply divisive. While some praised her for reviving the economy and asserting British sovereignty, especially during the Falklands War in 1982, others blamed her for increased inequality, unemployment, and the decline of northern industrial towns. Her premiership ended in 1990, leaving a legacy that still polarizes British politics. 8. The New Labour Era and Global Britain. 1990s, 2000s. After years of conservative rule, Tony Blair's New Labour swept to power in 1997. His government embraced moderate social reform and market economics. Notable achievements included the introduction of a minimum wage, devolution to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and investments in education and health. Blair's foreign policy, however, was controversial. His alliance with U.S. President George W. Bush led Britain into the Iraq War in 2003, which damaged his reputation and provoked widespread protest. At home, the early 2000s saw economic growth and increased multiculturalism. The UK became more integrated with the European Union, but remained ambivalent about full political union, keeping the pound sterling rather than adopting the euro. 9. Financial crisis and Brexit. 2008 to 2019. The 2008 global financial crisis struck Britain hard. Banks like RBS were bailed out, public debt soared, and austerity became the policy of the 2010 conservative-led government under David Cameron. In an attempt to resolve internal party tensions, Cameron called the 2016 referendum on EU membership. To much shock, the Leave vote won by 52% to 48%, leading to Cameron's resignation and ushering in a turbulent period of political instability. Theresa May, then Boris Johnson, led contentious Brexit negotiations. Britain formally left the EU on January 31, 2020, ending nearly 50 years of integration with Europe. 10. Britain in the 2020s, pandemic, change, and challenge. The COVID-19 pandemic hit Britain hard, with over 200,000 deaths and widespread economic disruption. The government introduced furlough schemes, lockdowns, and a successful vaccine rollout, though it also faced criticism for its initial handling of the crisis. Brexit's impacts began to materialize, including trade disruptions and debates over the Northern Ireland Protocol, nationalist movements in Scotland, and renewed tensions in Northern Ireland highlighted the fragile unity of the UK. In 2022, Queen Elizabeth II passed away after 70 years on the throne, marking the end of an era. Her son, Charles III, became king. Politically, Britain faced challenges from inflation, energy crises, and leadership instability. Prime ministers changed rapidly, from Boris Johnson to Liz Truss, whose tenure lasted just 49 days, and then to Rishi Sunak. Socially, Britain remained deeply divided along lines of class, geography, and ideology. Immigration, identity politics, and the legacy of empire continued to provoke heated debate. 11. Britain's modern identity. Modern Great Britain is a country shaped by contradiction. A former empire navigating post-imperial identity. A proud democracy facing internal and external challenges. A multicultural society grappling with questions of integration, equity, and memory. Its history since the Industrial Revolution is one of immense change, technological innovation, political evolution, cultural creativity, and global influence. Yet it also remains haunted by past inequalities and complex legacies. As Britain looks to the future, its identity is still being forged, not in the shadow of its empire, but in its ability to adapt, reinvent, and lead in a changing world.